Michigan has a primary on March 10th, and almost all of the talk has been about who to vote for as the presidential nominee. Because Donald Trump is a shoo-in for the Republican nominee, there's concern lots of Republicans will stay home instead of going to the polls to vote. If that happens, they may be missing out on crucial other items on the ballot. Joining us now is Michael Shostak, the Bloomfield Township trustee. How are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk first about this presidential election, basically. Do we think a lot of Republicans are going to stay home, and how do you get people to come out to the polls?
Well, I think that in communities like ours in Bloomfield Township, people like to vote. They like to go to the polls. It's a social thing. They like to, now with no reason absentee, we've seen a sharp increase in the number of people that are voting absentee. I think this is going to be a high turnout, probably equal to at least what we saw in 2016 for the March primary. This tends to get roughly the same turnout as the August primary, which doesn't have as much interesting elections on it. And I think that we're still going to see a pretty good turnout. I mean, Republicans may say, well, I don't need to vote for Trump because he's a shoo-in, or I'm not going to vote for Mark Sanford or anything like that, and that's fine. But given the fact that there's no reason absentee, I would certainly encourage everybody in Bloomfield Township, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or independents, to get out and vote, because we do have other very important things on the ballot.
In fact, you have a huge issue on the ballot, and that's what you're here to talk about.
Yes.
We're talking about police, fire, EMS.
Correct.
What is the ballot issue?
So we have a millage renewal question on the ballot. It's one of several millage renewals that are on the DIA has one. Some of the school districts have questions as well. But in Bloomfield Township, we have a millage renewal for 1.24 mills, which is a renewal of a millage that was put in place 10 years ago, so it just expired, and we are looking to get that renewed for another 10 years.
That would bring about $2.5 million to the police and $2.5 million to the fire department?
Correct. So it would be about a $5 million levy.
Every year?
Every year for the next 10 years, so 1.24 mills. So the total millage that we have in Bloomfield Township is roughly 10.5 mills. And keep in mind that when you pay your property tax bill, the property tax bill goes to Bloomfield Township, or whatever township you live in, or city if you live in a large city. But what people don't realize is that the vast majority of that money that people pay in their property taxes doesn't stay in the municipality. It goes to the county, it goes to the state, it goes to the school districts. So we get to keep, in Bloomfield Township anyway, 27 cents of every dollar that's paid in property taxes. And then of that 27 cents, we're talking about 10%, so 1.24 mills right now, of our total tax levy on the property in the township.
So this would be additional money to that, specifically for fire and police. And is that the only place it can be used, or can it be moved?
So this is a general millage, which means that it goes into the general fund, and it gives the board the flexibility to use it as it sees fit. Over the last 10 years, the total amount of money raised by this millage has gone into police and fire. We do have millages that go directly into police and fire, just like we have a millage that goes into roads. We have a millage that goes into our senior center. But we do have this as a general operating millage, and that money is earmarked for police and fire and dispatch.
Why do you think you're getting so much blowback on this issue of, is it a renewal and do you really need this money or not?
So the history of this particular millage is what's leading to this controversy. So the millage was put into place first back 10 years ago in the height of the Great Recession. And the argument made at that time was pay more to pay less, okay? And the way that slogan was founded came from the fact that because of the sharp decline in property values, overall property tax revenue was down sharply in the township. So we needed the additional money, and I was not on the board at the time, I should say that. I'm just completing my first term now. But at the time, the board sold the millage by saying, we need this extra money to shore up the budget because of the sharp decline in property tax revenues, coming from the drop in property values overall, right, in the Great Recession. And so the argument was that that we need this money to shore up the budget. People look today and say, well, property values have rebounded.
Right.
Okay, so if property values have rebounded, then why do we still need this revenue? Why can't we just let it expire? And the answer is really twofold. First, because of the Headley Amendment and Proposition A from 1994, when property values increase, the taxable value can only go up by the lesser of 5% or the rate of inflation, which the rate of inflation has been far less than 5%. So the amount that your taxable value on your assessment can go up is limited by the rate of inflation, which historically over the last 10 years has been about 1.5%. In addition to that, the total overall tax collection cannot increase by more than the rate of inflation. And so what happens is the property tax millage rates actually get rolled back or reduced when the taxable values go up, quote unquote, too quickly. And so this was meant to be a governor on the growth of people's tax bills when they're in their house. It's in a liquid asset. And they've got to come up with money to pay these taxes if their values are increasing so much. So what's happened over the last 10 years is that even though property values have rebounded, taxable values in the township are just now getting back to where they were in 2008. But because of that Headley Amendment, the millage rates themselves were reduced as the property values went up. So the total tax collection is still less or just about the same as it was in 2007. But as we know, just because we're collecting the same amount of money as we did 12 years ago, our expenses have still gone up. Our labor costs have gone up, benefits costs, healthcare have gone up, utilities have gone up. All of the other expenses related to the township have gone up. So we're just getting back on the revenue side to where we were 12 years ago. But we have 12 years worth of increases on the expense side that we need to catch up with.
So residents who are saying, they're just crying wolf, they don't really need the money, they have the money, they could cut back somewhere else. You're saying that's not the case anymore.
No. So I put out a letter to the community, and both on social media sites as well as my own website. And in it, I laid out the case for why the revenues that we're getting without this millage would not be sufficient to cover our expenses. And the biggest part of it is that we have legacy costs, pension costs, and retiree healthcare costs that we can't do anything about. We have utility costs that we can't do anything about. We have all of these non-discretionary items that we have no control over. The only thing we do have control over is labor. And labor is really 80% of our budget. So we can't make cuts. So if we lose, this is a renewal. This is not a new tax. This is a renewal. So imagine.
All right, let's get into that.
Yeah.
Let's take a short break and we'll
Okay.
get into that. We'll be right back with more news now after this. Welcome back. We're talking with Michael Shostak from Bloomfield Township. You're talking about a renewal versus a new tax. And it just seems that in Bloomfield Township that there's this group of people that don't trust what they're being told, that this is necessary. Does this go back to the last election? And I ask this because if you drove through Bloomfield Township at the last election, there were signs everywhere, support police and fire, all over the place. You couldn't move without seeing a sign. And there is no signs right now. It's like the invisible election. And it makes people wonder if you're trying to sneak something by them. Because it was so vocal and so loud last time. And it was, I don't know if it was trounced, but it was voted down. And now here we are again, and there's a chance that less Republicans will be going to the polls because Donald Trump is a shoo-in. And there's this idea that, hey, this is a big secret. Now you're here, so it's not a big secret as far as you're concerned.
I'm here. I'm all over social media.
So what happened?
We've been talking about it at every meeting. So what's happened is last summer we tried to initiate a special assessment district over the whole township. So that was the new tax, and the argument that we made at that point was that the state law changed. We as an older community are burdened with many legacy costs relating to retiree health care and pension costs. And the state law changed that said you now have to pre-fund or put into a trust up to at least 40% of the actuarial value of your retiree healthcare costs within 30 years. And so when we did the math, that came out to about $2 million a year. Plus we had our pension costs so we needed, it was about $4 or $5 million a year that we needed to take out of our budget to go directly to pay for these legacy costs. And so that was going to mean that we would have to cut money elsewhere. So we said, let's go to the residents first and explain that this money is going to have to come from the public safety fund. It's going to have to reduce our police and fire unless we can come up with additional revenue. And so we said that in addition to the 1.05 mils that we wanted extra, we were going to take the 1.25 of this expiring millage, roll them together, and call it a new SAD. And then this 1.25 would not have happened. We wouldn't be voting on it. That lost about 60-40. There were signs everywhere. There was 2 ballot committees, one on the pro side, one on the con side, that argued, the pro side said we need to come up with this money. There's no, without making drastic cuts, we're not going to be able to come up with it. On the con side, they said, no, you've got a lot of largesse. You can find a way to cut it. And it failed. And
were there drastic cuts?
We cut 16 positions, 12 of which came from public safety. We eliminated several township programs, including our Household Hazardous Waste Day of collection, where we would do that twice a year, our shredding collection, our Dream Cruise event. So we cut some of the programs. We cut our animal shelter and our animal control that people in the township,
things people like,
people need, right? In addition to cutting 16 positions. So we made cuts. We also cut $1 million out of our healthcare spending by going to a self-insured model. We refinanced our pension bonds, saved about $300,000 a year in interest. So we came up with about $4 million in savings. But because that SAD failed in August, we needed to come back and get a renewal on this 1.25 mils. Well, now it's 1.24 because of the Headley rollback, but the 1.24. So we needed to get the renewal back. So we wouldn't have had to vote on it now if it had passed in August. It didn't pass, so now we got to come. And now you don't see the signs out there yet, although I do understand that there might be some coming, because people just, if it didn't go forward with the signs last time, I think the ballot committee said, you know what, we're just going to see what happens.
So everybody's at home doing their math on this thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is, we've seen something that we don't see all the time. We've seen the chiefs come out and make some pretty serious statements. Let's start with police. Mm-hmm. What did the police chief come out and say, and why?
So the police chief came out and said that that if we lose this $5 million, so again, this is a renewal. So this is money we've had in the budget for 10 years. We're going to lose 10%. Just chop it right out of the budget. Where's that money going to come from? We can't take money out of retirement. We can't take money out of utilities. We can't take money out of fixed infrastructure. It's got to come out of 80% labor. So it's going to come from people. Okay, that means firefighter boots, that means police boots, and that means administrative staff. The bulk of the money, because 75% of our personnel costs are public safety. That's where the bulk of the cuts are going to come. So we say, to answer your question, the police chief said that he was going to lose about 20 officers.
Officers or personnel?
Officers. Yeah, okay. Officers. So one of the things we did is we had a traffic investigations unit. We've closed that. That was some of the cuts that we made after the August, right. We have people that work in multi-jurisdictional task forces, like the narcotics task force and the financial crimes task force, things like that. We have officers that are embedded. We're going to pull those back. School liaison officers. We had a unfortunate false alarm back at Bloomfield Hills High School in December of a active shooter alert. Somebody pulled the active shooter alarm, and we had a school officer, police officer, in the school at the time, and he was on site in 30 seconds and was able to assess the situation and kept the false alarm from really getting out of hand. So we would lose that, the school liaison officer. So the police, that's where we'd lose on the police side.
So the police would be basically responding to crimes rather than preventing crimes. Correct. Or doing other things in the community that help keep the community safe.
Community relations officer. We'd lose 1 or 2 detectives out of our detective bureau. So we have 61 sworn officers, and we would lose 15 to 20 of them.
Do the administration clearly thinks that will have an impact on safety in the community?
Yeah.
And what are the residents responsive to that, or do they think you're bluffing?
No, I mean, well, it's both. Some people understand that and say this is 10% of the budget, $5 million. Where's it going to come from? And they understand that there's going to have to be cuts. There are some folks that I've spoke with who don't believe us and think we're bluffing. And I try to say to them, I don't know why we would be bluffing. There's no gain to be had from this. People. I've been accused of corruption and bribery and all this stuff. I said, I don't get a salary. I don't get benefits. I'm a public servant. I do this out of my part-time, that I have. I don't take expense reimbursements. So there's no incentive to me to come in and lie about this and bluff this. I mean, these are the facts. These are the numbers. I'm a finance guy by trade. I laid it out online and said, these are the numbers. I'm going to continue to put information out there to show people that this is the spending all relates to the legacy costs. It has to be paid for. And if we take 10% out of the budget, it's got to come from somewhere.
All right, let's get into that after the break. We'll be right back with more News Now after this. Welcome back. We're talking with Michael Shostak, Bloomfield Township trustee. We were talking about police, and the chief says it's serious. Let's talk about fire, and fire also includes EMS, right?
Correct.
So tell us what the chief is saying there as it relates to response times for fire, for EMS, for the ability to get to people when they need them most.
Right. So we're going to lose probably 20 firefighters, and our firefighters are also paramedics, so they double as both. We're going to potentially have to close 2 of our 4 fire stations, which will affect our coverage around the community. And one of the things that we do now that most communities do not is EMS transport. So we have our own rigs that when they show up on scene and they care for whoever's injured, they can put them right back in the rig and drive them to the hospital. And that allows for continuity of care. You've got the same people that are working on them, taking them into the truck, and are able to continue that care and hand it off at the hospital. The benefit on top of the care benefit is that we are able to get some revenue from doing the EMS transport. If this millage does not pass and we have to lose those firefighters, we will not be in a position to be able to offer that transport, and that means we're going to have to outsource that to STAR or somebody else that comes in. You call them in, they come in, they have to take over the care in the middle, they do the transport, they get the revenue. Because we're not going to be able to send firefighters, EMTs to the hospital to continue that care because we're going to need them back available for other runs. So that's really going to affect continuity of care and also the ability to generate that revenue from the EMS transport.
Bloomfield Township is considered one of the wealthiest communities in the state, maybe even in the country. How much money are you talking about, per family per year?
Sure. So this is a 1.24 mil renewal. That comes out to $1.24 for every $1,000 of taxable value, not assessed value, taxable value. The average taxable value for the 16,000 homes within Bloomfield Township is about $200,000. So that works out, when you do the math, that comes out to about $225 a year.
So why is there so much controversy over all this? Is there something that I'm missing? Is somebody getting medical benefits? Are you getting cars? Are there all these perks that people are saying cut those first before we agree to give you more money? Sure.
So I think that a lot of people were the people that are taking the no position on this millage are the same people that took the no position on the special assessment back in August and said that there's largesse that can be found. People talk about cars. We have 9 cars that are township owned that go to department heads and administration. That's become a hot button issue. I can assure you I've done the math, we've studied it. It's the most cost-effective way to do it, to give that access to those leaders of the community. And instead of giving like a car allowance or anything like that, now we could pay mileage too. That's a reduction. It would be a reduction in pay. So some people are upset about that. But again, it comes out to, you're talking about $20,000-$30,000 cost versus a $5 million budget. The other thing that people I think are upset about is the benefits that the township employees get, specifically the healthcare benefit. They have a very good healthcare benefit, but as I point out to people, I said when you take a job in the public sector, you expect a lower salary and good benefits. It's just public sector versus the private sector. You know that. We're currently doing a compensation study and staffing study that is going to compare us to several other regional employers, both in the public sector and the private sector, to make sure that we're paying at market. But I believe that we pay under market, but I don't want to prejudge the study. We've hired a consultant to do that. But that is certainly something that people have pointed at as said, like, well, we need to charge our employees more for health care. And again, we could do pay cuts. We could, if it comes to laying people off versus doing pay cuts, that's something that we might have to explore if the millage fails.
What is this doing to morale for city employees, for firefighters, for police?
Yeah, it's really tenuous right now because you've got folks that watch these board meetings, that hear the public comment, that people come and talk about the non-essential employees that we have, that they're not important, that they dehumanize them, they tell them that they should be taking 20% pay cuts, et cetera, over a relatively minimal amount of money that people are already paying. And I'm not minimizing the tax burden. Obviously we want to be fiscally prudent with how we spend our money, but I think if you study the budget and you look at how we spend money, the amount of money that we spend today on public safety, roads, general operations is the same or less than we spent 15 years ago. And that's with all of the cost increases and inflation that we've had. The biggest burden that we deal with right now, legacy costs. And unfortunately, without a bankruptcy, and our community is not in a position to do that, we have legacy costs.
We talk about recruiting issues here on this show for police and fire. Do you have police officers and firefighters that are saying, look, I need to get to someplace where there's more security?
Yes.
How does that impact?
We hold meetings regularly with our rank and file and try to build up morale and talk about that the community is going to rally behind them and support them, and we're not going to have to make these cuts, because I don't know what's worse, being let go as a firefighter or a police officer in Bloomfield Township and then going somewhere else where there's plenty of jobs available, or being one that stays behind and now have to pick up the work that 20% more people did before without any more pay. So it's a real problem that we have a prestigious police department and fire department. We're one of the only communities in the state that requires our police officers to have bachelor's degrees, 4-year degrees. One of the very few. We have high standards for our recruitment and our retention, and it would be a shame to see the prestige of our department affected because of this.
All right, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
A serious issue. We want a big turnout at the voters' box, so make sure you get out there and vote. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. For everyone here at News Now, I'm Kevin Dietz. Good night.